Good evening, everyone. A special greeting from myself. My name is Antonio Andric, and I'm the director of the Julian Prealps Natural Park. Greetings also from the park staff and the president and the board of directors. I'm very happy that this moment has come. This evening you get the chance to see a preview of the documentary about the Ural owl. As seen in the poster, this is the team that will accompany us for an hour to the speaker and guests you see here on my right. Let's start saying that the realization of this project and documentary is provided to us by a European project, within which, as the Julian Prealps Natural Park, are involved as partners. This European project deals with ecological connectivity, and the name of the project is Dinalpconnect. It deals with connectivity precisely between the Alpine area and the Dinaric Mountains, and involves a whole series of partners and countries that wind along the Balkan Peninsula up to Greece. So why Italy and Slovenia? Because the pilot area within which we have developed and are still working on the project is relative on one hand to Italy in the Julian Prealps, in the Friuli-Venezia Giulia region, and on the other hand, in the Slovenian side, from the territory of Trilov National Park. So as I was saying, the European project gave us the opportunity to go and make all this come true. It's a project that was born from far away. The guests we have with us this evening, and all the speakers, are trained experts, very experienced in the territory of the Friuli-Venezia Giulia region. They will accompany us on this journey today. Enrico Benussi and Fulvio Genero will tell us in particular about the research and their activity, which started at least 20 years, if not more, ago. They will soon share everything about it, as they also have documented the return of these pieces to our region. Marco Favalli is the one who edited the video, which we're going to see very soon. Marco is a supplier and also an environmental guide that has been collaborating with the park for years, and has also edited other wonderful documentaries and videos. I remember some recent ones, like the one on the amphibians or the one on the vipers, which you can still find on the YouTube channel of our park. Just a reminder that from 7 onwards, you will also be able to find the recording of this evening and the video and the documentary that we're going to display in preview. And lastly, I'm very honored to be able to present our special guest for this evening, which is Dr. Francesco Petretti, who we know to be a biologist, methologist, and professor at the university, is a scientific consultant, and I think many of you know him as a television science communicator, of course. So also a documentary maker and writer. On the event poster, we listed some of these activities. However, we'll see more of them, experiences, including television and radio of these years, which made him a public figure of really great importance. And this is also the reason why he's so renowned. For instance, I remember precisely the author and presenter of radio and television programs such as King Solomon's Ring for Rai Radio 2, the Science Page for Rai Radio 3, and then an expert naturalist and scientific consultant for programs such as GEO&GEO, Quark, Nord Ovest Passage, Explorer, and others. So I'm sure his curriculum is known by everyone. It will help us after the screening of the documentary to kind of do a synthesis and connect all that has been said and make the final comments and moments for this evening. I'll stop talking now and I'll immediately give the word to Enrico Benussi, who will begin to introduce us to this team, the Ural owl, precisely this nocturnal bird of prey with such a fascinating and somewhat mysterious name. Please, Enrico. Well, many years have passed since the beginning of our research. We were 2 researchers interested and intrigued by the presence of this big owl, also in our area. But in reality, given the proximity of the neighboring Slovenia, we started in those territories to acquire all the information and experiences we needed to eventually find this large nocturnal bird of prey also in the Italian territory. We were perhaps visionaries at the time. I remember very, very passionate. We spent great nights researching and gaining experience in the Slovenian territory. The Ural owl is a species that is mainly distributed in the western Palearctic in the northernmost part. Therefore, it has a vast distribution mainly in the areas of Russia up to Scandinavia. We have seen a detached group in another sector of the central part of Europe, in particular in Carpathian area and along the Dinaric Alps up to the border at the time of Friuli Venezia Giulia precisely. Two subspecies have been described in the western Palearctic, the liturata, present in the northern Europe, and its mature species in the central part, detached from this original distribution. As you can see, the owl of the Urals is second or third in size at the European level, immediately after the eagle owl and perhaps the Lapland owl, and is actually recognizable by this basically light-spotted coloration. The very showy yellow beak, the long tail, which is typical of those species that then go hunting in the woods and they need to change direction suddenly. The Ural owl has been almost a myth for us. We started our work from a few observations that actually existed, all relating to Friuli Venezia Giulia, about catches and finds even prior to 80s, 50s, and which until 1994 were rarely localized, as can be seen in the map, in some area of the foothills, even on the plains. There were a total of 23 observations. 23 data, very few. But in reality, it was possible to understand that the Ural owl, even if from nearby Slovenia, could arrive to us and was indeed there. It was a matter of concentrating and trying to study it and see actually where it was. We initially focused on the winter period, because it's known that these are the movements by young subjects or adults who abandon nesting and then go, and in winter perhaps in different areas, not typical of the species, but to see if eventually it could have been found as a breeder. We decided to start from Slovenia, in particular from Transnazionale, the Tarnova forest located northeast of Gorizia, a very beautiful wooded area, very wide, a domain that extends seamlessly for several kilometers. We started the first observations, the first studies. We applied nest boxes to see if they were actually used by the species, and that was the first work ever done in the species of Slovenia that brought results, and also allowed us to acquire some experience. After this, we also went to visit other areas where the tawny owl was, also in Slovenia, in the area of Montenevoso, the Sneeze, where here forests in the northernmost terminal part of the Dinaric forest. The species is particularly widespread, and also in that occasion we managed to acquire a lot of information that we then used to guide our study and knowledge also in the Italian territory. We also went to Croatia, where we managed to collect interesting observation, especially in the mountain Istra in the Sais area, where we were able to document also photographically and record the sound of these animals. We were then able to do this as a playback in the area at the border with Italy, in the valleys of Latisone, and in 1994, thanks to the continuity of the area between the Tarnova forest and the Latison Valley, we managed to acquire some interesting information on the wintering of these species. And the one in the Tarnova forest was our first job ever. And it was conducted in a sample area of about 13 square kilometers. Back then, we managed to identify 4 or maybe 5 nesting pairs close to one another, and it was a rather complex job, quite long, even though with a lot of outings in the countryside, to just actually identify the territories. The good density we found in this area allowed us to bring subsequent experiences to Italian territory and also validate the historical data we have, just a few historical data we have. It must be considered that the species up to 1994 in Italy were considered only accidental. After this, as you can see in the slide, in the Nati zone valleys in grey, there were more subject contacts. And here you can see all the areas that we have been viewing, and in particular these photos at the bottom right is the first photographic documentation of the species in Italy. It was made in March 1994, and it is a sort of great satisfaction for us. It is worth noting that the wintering observations were initially limited only to the Lati zone valleys, which in this case are rather large areas. Only afterwards we were able to increase the research and look for more nesting, thanks to the considerable effort that we were able to determine and confirm in the same year in the area of Montemia, in an area immediately on the border, which is Slovenia territory, but always for the first time in Italy. Before this moment, the history of these species in Italy was just scarce, and we only had a general overall picture that can be seen from the data prior to 1850s until 2008. So as I said, from 1850s to 1993, the available data was very scarce, 23 in total. In the winter of 1994, we have our first wintering data. 11 subjects were contacted, 9 males, 2 females, in Martu bridge trees in the various valleys of the Cividale area. This was the element that prompted us to deepen our research even further. And the research, as I said, had a positive outcome in the summer of 1994, where there was the first confirmation of the nesting of the species in Italy. This large animal, which in reality was probably already present, but due to the lack of research, the work on nocturnal birds implies going out at night, and people are not willing to sacrifice the nights to get information on the species. At least one couple reproduced in an old bird nest, probably buzzard, in the bridge mix with the spruce about 720 meters above the sea level, very close to the border. In the following years, from 1995 to 1999, the researchers continued. It was a moment of relaxation. There was no real specific research being extended over time in an organic and continuous way. But despite everything, the outcome led, in this period, to actually verify their presence in the forest of the Cancelio and the border with Veneto. And then more subjects were found in the Gorizia Karst near the Redstone Lake and on the Trieste Karst, where a female was found dead by electrocution. Therefore, we actually had the confirmations of all historical data that the birds were there. The species was also present in Italian territory regularly and also outside the reproductive period. In the most recent years, from 2000 to 2004, the species is contacted several times and in different periods of the year, and seen in the Carnic Prealps, but also in the Ucea Valley, in the upper valley of Palar Torrent, for example, and along the eastern slopes of Mount Doran and Mount Quar. Therefore, here too we had the confirmation that we are indeed in contact with subjects, and that eventually we could have thought they would have begun to nest also in other areas, and not only along the Slovenian border. It's no longer after, in 2005, that we found a reconfirmation of a nesting of at least one pair, contacted several times, again in the Vogo Mountain and Nati zone valleys, where we started our research. Finally, in 2006, it was confirmed as breeding in another district. We no longer had data only from the extreme areas at the eastern of the country, but also in mixed forests of Mount Quar. 2-3 territorial breeding pairs between 800 and 1,000 meters of altitude. The first nesting in the Cancelio woods was also reported along this time. always on the slope in the Friuli Venezia Giulia, and in the same year, as many as 10 nest boxes with places on Mount Vogo to favor nidification. I started thinking that the fact of putting and favoring the species with the nest boxes could have perhaps given us the results we were looking for. And from here, it did not take long for us to get results. It took a couple of years initially for the species to understand that the houses were certainly a suitable and good site for nesting. And in 2008, there was the first nesting in a nest box, to our great satisfaction, and 2 born and fledged chicks. In the same year, the same nest box was occupied, but unfortunately abandoned due to an off-road track built less than 10 meters from the nest box. In the same year, another 10 nest boxes were placed in Mount Quar, in the Carnic Prealps, so in total we had less than 20 boxes located in these 2 areas. From here, they practically began to collect all the data that Fulvio will later illustrate on the nesting, which took place with an increase in the population, which today appears well distributed within a regional territory. But currently, the areas where the species nest are rather localized in 5 or about 6. All the images you see were actually collected during our inspections. On the left, you see a female with typical plumage. The female is exclusively related to the mission of the song, which is different in females, even more hoarse than that of males. And the dimensions are identical. The wingspan is about 1 meter and 30 centimeters, 1 meter and 40 centimeters, and it was almost unbelievable to think that for many years this species was practically gone unnoticed because there was a lack of research. We were then lucky enough to be able to get a confirmation across the entire national territory. On the right, a different dress from hellenistic subjects. These birds also have a different plumage, which can be more or less dark depending on the bird. There are areas in Slovenia where it is estimated that about 10% of one or some populations around Ljubljana are made up of individuals with this type of dark color plumage. I will stop now to let Fulvio talk, and he will tell us how the story ends and continues up to our days. Thanks, Enrico. As I said before, actually, it is a decades-long history which began from far away. Enrico remembered it very precisely, with the first report and observation in the Natizon Valleys in 1994. It's a history of 30 years of research, of passion, monitoring and reporting. I would like to remind to all those who are following us that if they would like to ask some questions, they can do so by using the chat below. We will answer all questions at the end of the live broadcast after the last speech by Francesco Petretti. Let's give the word to Fulvio Genro. Thank you. Let's continue with this exciting story. Enrico explained the historical stages very well. Rather long, but when working with these pieces, it's never easy. Here we can see Henry in action, something we have done hundreds of times. You go out at night in difficult climatic conditions. It's not easy to work in these conditions. We use acoustic emitters to use a territorial song of the male. Otherwise, this species that sings very, very little. It's a spontaneous song. It's rather difficult to come across with. With this system, called playback, it is easier to reach them and understand their distribution. Over time, we managed to refine the technique and understand that in certain periods, they sing even during the day. So we managed to use that at our advantage and do research more easily and obtain more results. However, I must say that this is also fascinating. Here we see at night, we hear the sounds that come out of these mysterious places, especially the first few times because we were able to contact these species. But I would say that every time it is a really, really incredible emotion. And let's see the areas. These ones are the Natizon Valleys, beach placed. We can see that the suitable environment is found only in the upper part of the reliefs. Here are stronger isolated pairs, 1 or 2 per reliefs, separated by large valley bottoms from the other closest ones. There is a rather particular situation at the southwestern limit of the distribution, and this is because the conditions are certainly more difficult or less favorable than the center or more internal parts of the area. We are right in the Julian Prealps Natural Park. This piece is also present with few things. We see places of a somewhat different types. We are higher in the mountains, more mature places, as we'll see later, end up in the Tarvisiano in Carne, where we have very different woods, with many conifer spurs above all, but also white and beech. Therefore, places much more similar to those of Central Europe if we want. And in fact, here this piece then enters into an ecological connection with the Austrian and Slovenian range, and there is a certain continuity towards the center of Europe. We can still see the woods of the Natizon valleys. We used to see beech woods almost, also with trees that are quite small. The use of the wood, the coppice, as it is called, it is not allowed to have large beech trees, and it's certainly a rather poor wood, with these small trees that are certainly lacking, are very rare, suitable for sites for nesting, consisting of cavities where these birds love to nest. And in fact, here we can see one of our nest boxes that Enrico spoke about first, the one that was then used and are still used over time. Here we are in the Julian Prealps, a similar area also in the Carnic Prealps, with more mature woods, greater presence of spruce, therefore more mixed woods and more varied in type, but still with rather limited diameters, even here, for what concern the trees, that we can guarantee the presence of gross cavities. Limited, they're very scarce. To finish here then, in the mountainous part of the border area with Austria, in the Tarvisio area, where we have a prevalence of conifers with oak, black pines, and above all, spruce and white abbot, beech, more mature wood, and a very variety of environments and presences of more suitable diameters to allow the nesting of these birds. And as we've seen, the Euro owl nests in cavities. In the absence of these, it can also use the nest of large birds, usually buzzards or goshawk, but the preferred situation is that of cavities, that it can guarantee greater protection for the bird of the entire reproductive cycle. As these are normally very scarce in forests, we decided to use nest boxes. These are much larger boxes, weighing in between 15 and 20 kilos. They are very difficult to install. They require teamwork, and we have had in the past the help of various people and institutions, fortunately. It is a rather demanding job, as it must be built in an adequate manner and have to be able to house a considerable number of birds. These are the ones we later placed on the Cernic Prealps. These are the one on the Julian Prealps in the submontane part, and we see here the results that, as Henry said, arrived immediately from the early years. In fact, both the Euro owl and the common owl have shown a clear preferences for those cavities, which they promptly occupied. This was a truly hoped for result, which was not expected at all, and not at this speed, and it brought us great satisfaction. As we can see, the long tail of this bird is so remarkable that you can even understand if a box is occupied or not from a certain distance, just looking at the tail. In this case, it is remarkable that our nests were about a kilometer away, and perhaps even more interesting is the observation that other common tawny nests, that always nest in boxes, were located a few hundred meters from those occupied by the Euro owl. Here is a small intervention by Marco Pavani and the camera traps we installed in 2008, with which we managed to document the first flight of these pieces. They were undoubtedly camera traps of much lower quality than the current ones. So we can also see the image clearly not understandable perhaps, but they felt like they were collecting this very interesting data, especially at the time, because they were the first to arrive in Italy. The controls of these nest boxes are and were carried out with different systems. Here at the beginning, we use a mirror. We see Harry with the mirror, and in the upper image, a young male present in the nest. In most recent years, we started using webcams of the cameras that allow us to observe the presence of these birds on our telephones or monitors. Overall, the disturbance is reduced to a minimum because the checks are always made in the most appropriate periods and are very, very limited, and among other things, it is also a species that has not shown negative effects as a result of these studies. This information has been confirmed even before we started our research from experts coming from Germany and Austria, but also Slovenia. So this is what obviously happens when we are seeing the owl in lucky years. I'm saying this because the Ural owl does not nest every year, and the reproductive cycle of these birds is very, very variable. Let's say, for instance, that 1 year there's a lot of food. Many couples reproduce and have many young birds. And in this case, we can see a full nest box. When there is a proper food, many couples do not reproduce. And if they do reproduce, they lay fewer eggs and fewer young are born. It is therefore a system for adapting the presence of the species to the resources of the territory. So these birds are never, as someone claims when talking about raptors, abundant, but they are always found in adequate quantities for the resources of the territory. This photo was taken in 2021, where we see Marco would say a particularly favorable year that gave us great satisfaction. We also managed to bring some pullets, not every year, because it always takes special permissions to do so. However, we are bringing as many pullets as possible, and obviously these are the only ones that have been written in Italy, since this species is present only here since we started. Here are some images taken from the films made by Marco Favalli, a documentary that we will then have the opportunity to see, and are truly exceptional images both as regards to the setting, the presence, the attitude of the birds, but also of great scientific interest because they tell us a lot about the biology of these birds. In fact, camera traps are fantastic tools because they allow you to closely spy on the secret world of these animals without disturbing them. If, for instance, we had to lie in wait day and night to find out how many times parents come to the nursery, what they bring to eat, etc., it would obviously be an impossible job. Instead, with these camera traps, we can see how many times the parents' birds come, if they come during the day, if they come at night, and even if feeding is possible, and if what preys are they bringing. Here we see an adult with 3 chicks overlooking the nest, and as we said before, this was a particularly favorable year that allowed us to collect exceptional results. This is an adult above the nest box with a mouse in his mouth. This has happened many times this year, and the chicks were so full this year thanks to the abundance of micromammals, especially certain species of mice, which sometimes drop their food on the ground. Sometimes that rarely happens. Usually the youngs of this species and others are very, very hungry, and as soon as their parents arrive, they attack them just to take the food away from their beak. However, we've repeatedly observed in the videos that when the parents arrive, they are so full that they just let the mouse fall on the ground. Interestingly, this year the diet was based only on mice and voles, while in other years we have seen that it was basically based on dormice. We have seen many peculiarities and therefore ethological echoes on the life of these species. The climatic variations are also quite suggestive. The other year, the cold returned, so with late snowfalls, these two were like to present, as you can see later in some images taken in periods where the snow was abundant. After all, we imagine the Ural owl like this. We imagine them as the Russian forests or any Palearctic and cold areas. We imagine it with the snow and in these moments. These are the phases of data collection with camera traps. There are times when you collect the cars from the camera still in the field to see what was filmed. It is essential to understand that if the camera was moved, if the position must be changed, if something has not worked, because it seems impossible, but there is always something that does not work. That is not always fortunately, but it happens every now and then. With a gust of wind, a branch that breaks, an animal that passes, can move the camera trap that no longer films the Ural Falls, but that films something completely different. So we can say that with assiduous controls, it is possible to collect really important images and information. Here are some data from 94 to 21. So in over 20 years, 20 nests with at least 60 laid eggs have been detected on these 20 nest boxes. This is an estimate because obviously we don't want to disturb these animals and the observations are reduced to a minimum. And this is then estimated from the trend of reproductive season that we could have been a number of laid eggs, a young born, and a young fledglings. The deposition occurs across a very long period of time. Even in some years already at the end of February and some other years at the end of May even. Therefore, 3 months of time in which a species can spawn. It depends a lot on the years. Probably the climate or even food availability, but it's not easy to understand the reasons. As for the fledglings, so when the young leaves the nest, take place from the end of April to the mid of July. This is also a very, very large period of time. And this must be taken into account when we want to apply conservation rules in these woods, which we hope will be applied more and more frequently as we go by. This is because it's quite a long period. It is almost 6 months in which you have to be very careful to do with these forest operations or cuts. And cuts can be very important in these cases. Here we're still in the southern part of the Julian Prealps. We note how the forest in some sectors, despite being in a Natura 2000 area, has been completely transformed. The most beautiful trees are cut down, and there are trees with a rather limited consistency left, and the disturbance lasts for me because then in the logging phases and all the rest are rather long. Here is not so much the cutting of the modification of the structure of the forest, but above all the work that are often carried out also for practical reasons in the spring period can create substantial problems also for these species. After all, it is not easy to take adequate measures, and also because it's very difficult to find nests and understand which areas are the best for nesting. Here we can see even more consistent actions, which are carried out on the alpine part. We are in the Treviso area with large machines that carry out these cuts, removal, etc. And this is how I said, not knowing the position of the nest, it is very difficult to find them. We know those who use the nest boxes because we have the location for this, but other nests are very difficult to find, so it is also difficult in the spring period to avoid or try not to minimize the harm to these birds. And unfortunately, this is a problem that also affects other species and not only the Ural owl. Here we are in the conclusive summary phase. We can, after all these studies of decades, say that the estimated Italian population is about 40 to 60 couples distributed in these red areas that you see. The 4 from the submarine area, the pre-alpine and the alpine one. Certainly there are other areas of probable presence, that we see marked in green, but here they require many other studies and many other outputs in order to understand the distribution framework of these species, which however will become more and more precise over time. Finally, we can say that the distribution and phenology, as has been said, is a species that is present only in the northeastern part of Italy, in particular Friuli Venezia Giulia, and on the border with Veneto. Perhaps it will also be found a little further west, and we will see in the future localized. And we will be able to localize during the wintering and in any case seeing annual fluctuations. It will depend on the years, the climate, the food, but they descend down during the cold period from the nesting areas of the Alps or of Slovenia and then go to the valley floors areas or even the plains. This year, for example, many observations were made in the hills and plains or even in the cities, probably because there was a large number of young birds who then moved up in areas that are unusual or unknown to them. The habitat, therefore, is possibly extensive forests, that there are a number of mature, broad-leaved conifers with the presence of cavities suitable for nesting. During the movements, have we said, the species can appear anywhere, and that's what happened this year. Therefore, every new presence is a discovery for the Italian fauna, and it means a lot for the naturalistic scientific importance, but it's also to regards to the richness of our heritage. Thank you so much for the attention. Thanks, Fulvio, for this passionate presentation. You made us enter a bit into what is the biology of these species, and yet also made us understand the complexity of the work behind the monitoring and observation, such as how difficult it is to position the next boxes, which, however, it is a job that must be done overnight, so it's not such a trivial thing. Also, thank you for having touched on the topic of forest management. This allows me to say that one of the objectives of the European project is to go and identify what are the threats to ecological connectivity, and then to go identify what good practices can be done to manage forestry, which obviously take into account the permanence and distribution of these species and others. Let's now give the word to Marco Favalli. Good evening, everyone. It is with pleasure that this evening I present to you my latest documentary, made on Urali. It is a great emotion because we have been collecting material on this beautiful animal for many years. It is obviously a film focused on the biology of the species, but also on the monitoring work carried out by two researchers. You have heard of them before, tireless and full of passion. The idea was, therefore, born 20 years ago when I started collecting the first images and documenting the monitoring work of Fulvio Genero and Enrico Benussi on these species. Year after year, the project progressed, took hold, but never managed to materialize. Many tests, many errors, sometimes very good results, but insufficient to build a real documentary. In the meantime, fortunately, technology has made great strides, especially as regard to camera traps. A second ago, Fulvio told you that these tools were used to monitor the different stages of nesting. Certainly, it was not easy considering the height of the nest, over 5 meters, the fact that you had to check the cameras regularly, replacing batteries, checking the cars, all this in any weather conditions, even with a lot of snow sometimes. When a documentary is made, unfortunately, the time comes to leave the field, to leave and close the shooting, and this is always sad. But we always think that we can do more and better. And it went like this. 2021 was an exceptional year, thanks also to the experience acquired over the previous years, the technology available, and the great swarm of micro-rodents that favor the nesting. And last but not least, we do not underestimate the financing on the project, which obviously allowed us to make the documentary. But before starting the documentary, I wanted to thank Fulvio Genero and Enrico Benussi and Nerano Veginella for making this documentary, but also the park of the Julian Prealps and Gianmarco Cecconi, the narrator of this film. I'll leave the word to the director, and the video will start shortly. Yes, absolutely, thanks Marco. We also felt out your emotion in telling us this experience, and I think the most important thing now is to enjoy this wonderful video you made. Please, director.
Sembra molto vicino, vediamo se riusciamo a vederlo.
In the cross-border areas between Italy and Slovenia, research is being undertaken on a species recently discovered breeding in Italy, where it is only present in the pre-alpine and alpine sectors of the region Friuli-Venezia Giulia, up as far as its border with the Veneto. The Ural owl. The species inhabits the extensive coniferous and broadleaf forests, but only those with large trees, offering suitable nesting sites. The search for the presence of the Ural owl takes place both by day and night, at various times of the year.
Da qua. Andiamo qua? Sì, sì. Qua proprio.
Recordings of the birds, played back through amplifiers, are used to stimulate the song of territorial males in particular. Sometimes, the researchers use their own voices to imitate the calls as well. The forests will then reveal their presence. The owl is often given away by the alarm calls of other forest birds, frightened by its presence. In the past, as part of a study and conservation program of the Ural owl, nest boxes were erected on trees to favour the species nesting in forests with few natural cavities. Over time, particularly as a result of weathering, these artificial nest sites require maintenance.
Se riuscite a sistemare la cima, poi leghiamo direttamente la cassetta.
And are then put back in their original places.
Ok.
The installation of camera traps serves to document any breeding attempts. All that remains now is to wait and see whether this work leads to the hoped-for results. The researchers are convinced that this will prove a particularly favourable year for nesting. It's a beech mast year, in which there is abundant production of seeds, a fact which favours an increase in rodent numbers, thus influencing the food chain that connects them to the owls. The monitoring work is carried out in a range of different areas. In some parts of Slovenia, the species is very common and inhabits the vast dinaric forests. Places also inhabited by bears.
Quindi noi abbiamo fatto questo tratto qua.
Adesso siamo più o meno in questa zona.
E dopo riproviamo anche stasera, no? Sta zona qua.
After a long day, immersed in this extraordinary nature, just by chance, a melanic Urali owl is encountered. A phenomenon not that rare in this species, but one which always arouses considerable amazement in the lucky observer. The time has come to check the nest boxes. To everyone's great satisfaction, 2 of them are occupied. The camera traps provide images that allow the researchers to document the secret lives of these authentic ghosts of the woods.
Ecco che si muove.
In spring, the weather is very variable, and the adults are always active, feeding the young both day and night.
Qual è la prossima?
Un sacco di dati poi interessanti, no? Sulle ore, i ritmi di attività.
The chicks grow quickly as a result of the abundance of available prey. The parents then try to encourage them to leave the nest. The most enterprising of the nestlings gathers its courage and clings to the branch. Soon, it will also be the turn of the others. Adults still have to take care of the young, bringing them food and protecting them from any predators. Breeding success is verified by searching for the fledglings, which remain near the nests for a few days.
Vedi là, guarda. Guardalo là. Ehi, guardalo.
Tranquillo, Questo è uscito da poco comunque.
Sì, sì. Non più di un giorno.
Guarda com'è tranquillo. L'altro più in alto probabilmente è uscito un po' prima. Si è alzato di più sull'altro.
Non è facile
abete.
vederli.
No, si mimetizzano, perché poi stanno immobili.
Guarda, ci saranno delle borre sotto.
Infatti, guarda qua. Guarda che belle, proprio fresche queste, non è facile trovarle.
Piccolina, tipico del giovane.
Del giovane, sì. Comunque interessante.
Le portiamo via.
Vedremo cosa c'è dentro, cosa ha mangiato.
In the first nest, 5 young have hatched and survived. In the second, 6. This is a delicate moment. Sometimes they fall to the ground where they risk being preyed upon before reaching a safe perch. The adults, always attentive, continue to monitor and protect the young until the moment they are able to fend for themselves, dispersing into the forest. The important results obtained on the Ural owl are the outcome of many years of research carried out with the support of European Union funded projects, the commitment of the Nature Park Prealpi Giulie and other protected areas, working together to enhance and discover more about the most important components of the local fauna in these trans-boundary areas.
Here we are, live again. What can I say? We were amazed, and I thank you all for this evening. Especially thanks to Marco for this passionate and above all beautiful work he has done. You know that from now, you can view this video on the YouTube page of the park, both in Italian and in English. But now I would like to immediately ask to our special guest to speak. And as I said in the beginning, I'm honored to have Francesco Petretti here with us this evening. I would like to ask him for a comment or any consideration on our evening and on the work presented. Please go, Francesco. You're welcome. Director, thank you. Thank you for having me transported for these extraordinary minutes. You gave me the sense of raising on the forest, the singing of birds, and its living atmosphere in the various seasons in areas dear to me. Beautiful areas that you truly have shown me in all their beauty. I would like to start from the documentary, from the last thing I saw. And I do it from the perspective of a person who deals with documentaries. And I have often also edited festivals, documentary reviews with other varied juries. And therefore, with what was linked to a sort of documentary Oscar, you certainly won a first prize in one of the nature documentary festivals. But I already mentioned it to your colleagues when I sent an organizational message, because I had seen that it was a documentary in which the aspect of professional quality was combined. The use of the tripod, the soft panoramas, the zoom shots are missing. The use of the zoom, which is a use generally made by beginners, but those who do not use it means that they are already a professional and therefore have noticed this detail. Not to mention the sounds. This amazing mix of natural sounds. There is little music, only to underline. So once again, the Anglo-Saxon culture of the documentary, which is what brings the sounds of nature to television. And it's not that culture of those who put music because they have not made direct audio recordings and therefore must make up for it by making an artificial soundtrack. Instead, the wonder of hearing this now seems to me like a desperate alarm of blackbirds. When we spoke of the animals, that often signals the presence of the owl, with their cries, the alarm, and the voice of the black woodpecker, and the noises of the steps in the forest. Every now and then, some insertions of the interview of the researchers would not speak to the camera but talk to each other as if they were completely unaware of the presence of someone filming them, and this is a great quality element. So my heartfelt congratulations to Marco, who directed and produced this work, to Fulvio and Enrico, and to all the others who participated in it, and this way so bring in their contribution. And this is the documentary that you absolutely must bring to television, because it is documentary that people must see. The general public must see the great audience of GEO with exceeded 3 million viewers every afternoon, because it's must see now. Only the quality of an Italian work, certainly made with economic resources that are minimal compared to the investment that foreigners make when they have to make documentaries. And then above all, they must also see what our territory can offer. So I'll now stop talking about the documentary, and instead I'll talk about this wonderful mountain of yours, this Julian Prealps, this natural park that you, the director, manage with diligence and common sense and competence, thanks also to the contribution of so many people. I have a weakness for Friuli. I always have said that my favorite regions are. I don't want the others because I love them all, but they're definitely the ones in the mountains. Among those in the mountains, Abruzzo, for what concerns the Apennines, and Friuli for what concerns the Alpine region. I have traveled those mountains many times, even in the company of Paolo De Franceschi, right in Paluzza many times. I have also gone to turn and see stages at the Galli Forcelli parades, and therefore I have them in my heart. They are very splendid places, where it is a simplicity that also transpires in the way in which you have carried out your intervention, which is an intervention of the highest technological level. And here I move to the project. The project you have done is a project that has 3 important and fundamental components. The scientific part. The scientific research continues to be essential in a country like Italy, and Moltoni, the father of Italian ornithology of the last century, used to tell me, "Si Petretti." He called me her even though I was a child compared to him. Here, ornithology, the first thing to do is fauna, that is the knowledge of the distribution and presence of animals. When everything else comes later, comes after the study of ecology, of what they eat, say what they do. Wildlife is the first thing. And the fauna is the protagonist of our adventure, because we go in search and discover of an unknown species that did not even know existed in Italian territory before. Therefore, once again, the ornithological exploration becomes pure exploration, the search for something that is not known, that if it exists, and to what extent it is present. So this is an important aspect. Then obviously being great and experts and ornithologists, both Enrico Benussi and Fulvio, whom I have known for many years, having also walked steps together in the Italian Center for Ornithological Studies, and on many occasions we have also participated together in conferences, and then clearly the ornithologist comes out of the knowledge of who is there, how many there are and where they are, and begins to become an ecologist. Ecology was born with the study of birds. The great ecologists are almost all with a background of ornithology, because birds are the best tool to understand the mechanism by which the natural world works. With a mixed forest of conifers and beeches, where the predator-prey relationship works, and the fluctuation with rodent population, which are cyclical, and which in any case strongly affects the entire ecosystem, so much that we have seen reproductive success in a year worth of rodents, and how much this can move and modify ecosystems. Therefore, the ornithologist from a faunist becomes a scholar of the mechanism of ecology. And this is the central part of our adventure. The second adventure is that of the managerial intervention. It is not enough for you to know that the Urali is there. You want to save it. You want to protect it. You want the population to reach an optimal density, and that despite being on the southwestern outskirts of the area, it may be an important source population, what ecologists call source cultivation. That is, it produces young people who go to colonize new areas, and therefore may one day represent something that gives rise to an expansion of the population of our Eastern Alps. And therefore the intervention of artificial nests, which is undoubtedly an important intervention also for the collection of scientific information, but also intelligent, managerial. You have shown the woods that are cut, the woods that are used for the supply of timber. The young woods are woods that need an artificial supply of cavities to allow these animals, which need cavities to nest, to make their nest. And therefore the artificial nests become the instrument of an active and concrete conservation. If the Urali is present with these numbers in your park, and if one day the population will expand, as I hope it is likely to happen, even in other areas, it is your merit. It is thanks to this team. Let's forget the European contributions, which are certainly important, but it comes from a passion and desire to do things, because probably the work you have done, with great suffering and great effort, you would have done even if no one ever financed you. And this is a little bit of the trait, the bad luck, of people like Fulvio Enrico and the director, like Marco Favalli of myself. Next to the Biancone yesterday, I celebrated the 5th year that I went to post while waiting in the mountains of the Tolfa. I think I have almost never experienced perhaps a few pennies for this work that I have been carrying out for 15 years, with documentaries, with photographs, with papers published in foreign magazines, with works, a book, but who cares? That is, it is also beautiful that we are like that. And then scientific research, conservation, and we come to the third block. This is what I anticipated at the opening of my speech. of which I'm grateful for having involved me in this adventure, is communication. That we do must come out of our notebooks. I must come out of our drawings, our schemes. For example, this morning I was on the bank of a stream and there were these fishes. They are endemic fishes of the Italian peninsula. They are the Etruscan barbels, one of those species strongly threatened by the invasion of alien fish. And therefore in my notebook I drew the Etruscan barbel. I took a note of the fact that they were rare specimens, their dimensions, but these things must not remain in my notebook, just as your observations must not remain in the archives of the park, or in a specialty journalist of ornithology, but they must travel, and this combination with an absolutely traditional study technique is welcome. Men walking in the snow, climbing trees, attacking nests, taking chicks in hand, you see the naturalist struggling with what is more genuine than what is truer than his work, with the technology that is the camera trap, that the control mechanism of the nest, and that is this evening that you have organized, tend to this terrible pandemic that has perhaps irreversibly changed our lives, but has also made us discover the possibility of meeting at distance and to share this moment together. Therefore, this combination of a strongly naturalistic tradition, in which I continue to recognize myself, and its use of technology, albeit with the impediments that age entails because I have white hair. Typing on the keyboard on these things, I always have some problems. Often I resort to the help of my children to understand how some mechanisms work. But thanks to this technology, we met tonight, and I leave these magical moments in your woods, in your company. Thank you again. I am the one that has to thank you, and also of course Enrico, Fulvio and Marco. Here's now if maybe we all get on the screen together. We are now used to working in these virtual models. I have not seen any questions in the chat, and therefore, if they will not be asked in the next 30 seconds, I will say that we can also go towards the conclusion. But I ask you, if you'd like to see something more, I think that what Francesco Petretti said is really for us. How to say even a stimulus, but even a recognition, especially for you, we say. I do not take any merit because I do not have any. But in short, here I believe that for you, it is an acknowledgement of important, genuine work that you've been doing for many years. Of course, if I can say anything, well, I must say that today is a good celebration. Apart from seeing each other among other friends, even with Francesco, who will leave these moments alone, Enrico have been leaving them alone for decades. Being able to share them and make someone else participate in these fascinating things. Maybe not everyone will understand what there is behind this work, the importance of this wonderful birth, but this is a beautiful celebration that so regards of our friendship and passion, because we have worked more than anything else, as Francesco said, for years, with great passion and great interest, with a group who has worked very well, where there is mutual respect, mutual stimulus for everything that has done. So here I would like to say that is a crowning glory, thanks to this film by Marco. Also, this is our work. We can be presented to others who have not lived directly, for which I thank the whole group, and I must say that it was a particularly beautiful and stimulating evening. Yes, I too would like to thank Francesco, if there was possible, for the splendid words that he gave us. Honey, actually the effort made is useless here to tell it. which are rewarded by so many beautiful moments spent together. As I said to Fulvio, here true friendship are strengthened in the true sense of the word. Spending hours and hours in often uncomfortable conditions meant that we confronted each other, and we somehow managed to continue to maintain this relationship over the years. And this is perhaps one of the most beautiful things beyond all. I'm really happy to be part of this celebration too. We will certainly continue. We still have so much to do and so much to discover. Maybe, who knows, maybe technology will help us one day to do something even more, but we are really happy with what it is now. Have we found a species, a bioindicator, a large nocturnal bird, that who knows how long it was and no one have found it? We already have this great satisfaction that means a lot. Thank you all. Also for me, it was a great honor to work with Fulvio, who have always been friends, and with Enrico, who gradually became friends in the woods. So much passion, so many beautiful things, so many beautiful adventures lived together. I have never received such wonderful words to Francesco Petretti, so thank you very much. Deserved, well deserved. Thank you. In the meantime, some questions have arrived. This is the first that has been highlighted. I don't know who wants to try give an answer. I can try. Hi Tanya. In fact, you already gave yourself an answer to this. Some species prefer the wilder areas, perhaps forgotten, less disturbed. Actually, among these, there is the bear, the Ural owl, and others. So I think that the fact that they live in these particular environments is linked precisely to a greater tranquility of these areas. Even the vegetation left to natural conditions, and perhaps, as you say, it has an ecological corridor in a sense that it unites us to Slovenia, which is a little area where these species are mostly present and where they often come from. Next question. What are the most impacting threats to the species? Well, a broader discussion needs to be addressed. We spoke before, Fulvio had explained the problem of forest management very well. Many times it happens that the cuts in the woods, for example, were carried out at the wrong time. But this is not only true for the Ural owl, it is also true for other species. It is a crime to use those machines in May or June. And many times, these public administrations are lacking, although we ourselves had given some management indication for these species. In some cases, they have been disregarded. This should be recalibrated because it is of fundamental importance if we want to conserve all species and not just the Ural owl, to change methods and methodology and therefore concentrate on other, less delicate times of the year. This is the advice I can give. This question about predators is not straightforward. The predators of the pullets can be various, especially when they fall on the ground. In nocturnal birds, when the pullets fly, they do not yet know how to fly and often fall to the ground. This is a strategy so that they immediately move away from the nest and at least part of the bird is saved. But for the pullets, they can be stone martens or even other carnivores. If they are adults, they actively defend themselves. They are aggressive, even against us researchers who approach the nest. They can attack in very distinct way, but if the adult move away, there can be rather limited dangers. In Slovakia, for instance, we've seen from friends who deal with these species, the remains of pullets were found in nests of golden eagles. It is therefore likely that even an eagle was able to capture the young in certain conditions. Other natural enemies we don't know, except when they fall on the ground, and they are exposed to predators like foxes, wild boars, or other enemies. However, this is a very limited phase because they immediately tend to climb over others. This was the first question asked. I could say we have tried it in our pre-alpine areas, and areas from 800 to 1,200 meters. At higher altitudes, we have never encountered important presences. That's the band, the range, at least in Italy and in the alpine area. As Fulvio said, in Slovenia we have different situations. For example, in Ljubljana, they are at much lower altitudes. Probably in Northern Europe, in the Scandinavian forest, there are owls that are found at sea level. With us, however, the best condition is to place the boxes around 1,000 meters and not beyond. With the eagle owl, I would say no, because they're frequently completely different environments. Many think that the eagle owl lives in the woods. In reality, it lives more in open areas. It hunts in open areas, so it is a completely different environment. As for the tawny owl, there are various studies that also gives conflicting results in different geographical areas. There is certainly an east overlap. They feed on the same prey, but it seems that as for hunting system, they tend to prefer an area with a different density of trees. But in each area, there are different results. Slovenes argue that the common owl is often preyed upon the Urali owl. We have not found this, because we have seen the nests of these two species at only 100 meters from each other. Certainly there is some food competition, but the selection of the hunting environment is slightly different in the two species. Last question. The species is not present in Switzerland. In Italy, as far as I know, it is only present in Friuli, although I think that some couples are present in the Consiglio area in Veneto, and it is not excluded, in my opinion, that it has moved even further. It is an opportunity to ask, to investigate, to ensure that even the Venetian researchers start looking for it in their territory. Especially in Nevigal, the area closest to Consiglio, and this is not excluded that it is already there. Well, it seems to me that we have come to the conclusion of the questions. I thank you again, and maybe I'll leave the closing to Francesco, and then we can say goodbye. Thank you for this day. My promise is that what I already told you, I will come to Friuli at the end of April to see at that point not only the capercaillie but also the Urali owl, so I can book a tour with you. Those that you follow are special areas because there are a little out of mass tourism, large numbers, large structures, including accommodation. But this is good. And it is certainly obvious that economic resources must also be brought to local population through intelligent tourism. You have the opportunity to avoid the mistakes that others have made and maybe start again on the right foot. And therefore you have the possibility of intelligent tourism that could perhaps be listening to the night of the Urali owl song, which I'm sure surely excite many people who want to spend an absolutely different night than usual. So good luck with your work to you, director, because I know how much it costs to run a protected area. I know how hard your work is. To dear friends Enrico and Fulvio, with whom I hope to share a few days in the field, and Marco Favalli, whom I hope to find a winner in one of the next events, and I advise him to get busy to publicize this documentary in order to distribute it on mass television so that many can see it. Best wishes for everything. Thank you.